says 3:33, but this says 3:32. Oh. hmm. Well, those in the family, yes, that for whatever reason they have mentally disabled children, yes, and they really feel that there should be some accountability. I looked online and I'm not on the docket, Jack. Oh, now what happens when you represent any deaf or blind person? And you don't admit any evidence, right? You don't ask them where they were at on June 16th of 2017. You don't ask them, well, does anybody know where you were at on that day or that time? Yes. And then you say, well, the person's crazy. They're mentally ill or mentally defective. Ooch. For not knowing that I had emailed the Port Angeles Police Department. Now, wouldn't it be nice if the police department allowed for me to speak to my sons because they've been very, very reluctant to acknowledge the rights of the blind, the deaf, and the mentally disabled. Now, I can see that I did not get notice of court hearings. I was not present at the hearing. The order was not issued in the full faith and credit of the VAWA. You cannot say the respondent will be allowed visitation as follows. You have to protect, yes, the actual due process for every citizen of the United States. You can't tell a blind person you can't get notice of court hearings until you have a mental health evaluation. You have to give them notice of court hearings. You can't tell a deaf person, well, they don't speak so good because they've never heard, from the time of the birth, they've never heard a spoken word. Well, you can't do what you've been doing. Now, I was never given any notice or opportunity to be heard since 2011. Now, well, let's look at it. Okay, I never got notice or opportunity to be heard. You issued a protection order, and I wasn't a resident. Oh, on 8/12 of 2011. Now, for every blind person that would have had to have somebody else read the court, for every deaf person that thought that they weren't being heard, ooch, because they can't hear what you're saying. They've used for all the mentally disabled that thought, well, I can get married and I can make babies, but you don't have to give me notice. You do. They're American citizens, and you have to accommodate them. So for a person that is not mentally ill, yes, I'm not mentally defective, which I can see, I can hear, and I do understand. When I tell you it's against the law, it's fucking against the law. Hey, then you renewed the protection order. Yes. On May 31st of 2012. Yes. You remember that telephone call that I made to Healthy Families of Clallam County? Yes. Where I wanted to know if they got the documentation on Guam because they were communicating with the prosecuting attorney on Guam when I was going through the 7 hours of parenting classes. Yes. And it was their actual documentation. For them to be prejudicial, yes. Discriminatory, yes. To help my wife get a disillusion of marriage and then make up a bullshit police report. Let's say I was blind. Pow! Now I'm going to want equal access to the judicial system of the United States. This petitioning for the dissolution of marriage, yes. hmm And then the arresting of myself 3 days later, yes. For calling the domestic violence advocacy charity, yes. To find out if they got from Guam was against the law. Oh, you cannot call the police because you're the domestic. let's say I was mentally ill. I had 5 children with a spouse that wasn't. Yes. She decides to make up a story, has me put in jail on Guam. Yes. Approximately 2,656 days ago. Yes. I did 7 hours of parenting classes because I hadn't drank and I hadn't done any drugs. Yes. And I hadn't committed any crime. And then when I call you, you have me arrested after having helped her file for a dissolution of marriage. Now, the state of Washington, well, let's think about it, Brent. Oh, somebody motioned the court on June 1st to reissue the temporary protection order. Yes. Without any actual attempt of notice to myself, the blind, deaf, or mentally disabled respondent. Yes. Then you reissued it on June 12th of 2015. Yes. Did the petitioner motion the court? Now, as the blind, deaf, or mentally disabled respondent, oh, you say that you attempted to service, not served, not served, and you had a court hearing 40 days later. Now, as the blind individual, that for 7 years you issued protection orders, you would have thought that they would have contacted somebody that has helped them because of their blindness. Why is it that I don't get notice of court hearings? I'm mentally disabled. I don't understand that you're violating my rights. Now, how many mentally disabled persons have been in relationships or marriages where they had a fight and their spouse, the non-mentally disabled spouse that married the mentally disabled, yes, ran off to the court, took their kids, and say the guy's crazy. Now, why don't you get me all the blind, the deaf, the mentally disabled for the last 40 years? Every marriage, yes. Every birth certificate, yes. Every dissolution of marriage, and all the protection orders. Well, even though they were blind, deaf, or mentally disabled, the court had to make sure their rights were protected. Because you haven't given me the same access to justice as those that you had thought were the perpetrators of domestic violence.